here we are. I'm Tom Osman, and this is Whatever Comes Next, the podcast where I explore the world of underground and independent music making. And on today's episode, I am talking with Lucas Ward, who is the guiding force behind psychedelic-pop-rock project, the Silver Snails, who will be releasing their second album, Speed of Light, on the 5th of September, this coming Friday. And unconnected to the Silver Snails, but connected to this introduction, I am sleep deprived. I think I've had 2 or 3 hours sleep because I was in London last night seeing the great Buñuel. And if you're listening to this and not watching it, you will not have seen that I just stood up to show the Buñuel t-shirt that I bought last night. Great performance from the band. Got to see Xabi, the guitarist, and got to chat a bit with Eugene. So that was very fun indeed. And also got to meet someone that I sort of became familiar with through the Every Album Ever with Mike and Alex podcast, Sean Harris, which was very, very cool and surprising. And anyway, that's all incidental. The interview with Lucas. So this was a really nice sort of change of pace in a way for me. There's so much music that I listen to that's very abrasive and harsh and distressing and traumatic in one way or another. So Speed of Light is a record that is very, I guess it's sort of, I would say, presented with the spirit of optimism in mind. So like it's a very kind of like emotionally rich record. There are poignant parts to it, there are sad parts to it, melancholic parts to it, but there's a kind of a positivity running through it that's very infectious, delivered with musicianship and playing that can be quite rocking, but also is playful and poppy and catchy, and it's just a really lovely record that I have enjoyed listening to. And if that sounds like the kind of thing that you might enjoy, then I strongly suggest that you check it out. I will play a track at the end with a little clip coming up. It was a very insightful interview that gave me some perspectives that I hadn't had before. Lucas's experiences working in finance gave an interesting slant to this discussion, and there's also there are some interesting personal aspects, personal history that feed into this. Lucas was good friends with the late Elliott Smith, and that features as a part of this story, as well as our discussions of the music and various distant inspirations. The part that Lucas's wife plays in the band, the way that their children are sometimes involved as well in the music and in the music videos. All a very interesting kind of unique perspective and story, I would say. So, all that being said, you can check out the Silver Snails on their website, thesilversnails.com. You can go check out their music videos as well on their YouTube page, particularly their cover of Video Killed the Radio Star and the accompanying video. You can purchase, or you will be able to purchase, the album digitally or on CD. You can get the various links through their website. They're also on Facebook. And I think that pretty much covers everything. So, without further ado, Lucas Ward of the Silver Snails, take it away.
You say you know what I'm thinking, what's in my head. I say if this is so, then what's the point of fighting? You say you can read my mind, travel in time, change the weather. I say with me that's fine. It's just about time we face this together.
Hello, hello.
Hello, Tom.
Lucas, hi.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. I was interested to discover what kind of accent you were going to have.
Yeah, I'm originally from the West Coast, and then in my youth, I worked in Asia, studied Chinese and all of that. But as fate would have it, as Dylan says, a simple twist of fate, I ended up meeting my wife's brother in China. He's Italian, which ultimately led me to my spouse. And once you're married to an Italian, you're going to be spending a lot of time in Italy. That's what I found out. But it's, no, of course, nobody is crying for me.
Well, indeed. Yeah, I did.
Like,
I had an Italian girlfriend for a while, and when we first started seeing each other, she would complain. We actually was in Germany that we got together, and she would complain about, like the coffee in Germany or the tomatoes in Germany. I'd always be like, yeah, whatever. And then I went to Italy with her, and I was like, oh, okay. Now I understand.
yes, right. Your sensitivity to like qualities of coffee and liqueur and tomatoes, like the tomatoes in Naples are a whole nother thing, even the mozzarella. That's why the best pizza I've ever had is in Naples. And I think a part of it is the ingredients. It's not just, but there's art as well. I mean, the crust was, anyway.
Yeah.
I'm gradually becoming Italian. Actually, I have the passport, and we have kids there and everything. So,
Mm. And how is yours? Are you fluent in Italian at this point?
oh yeah, very. I mean, they can detect the accent, but you know, I'm about as fluent as I'll get. I'm sure
And
after
I mean, you
20 years.
mentioned the fact that you learned Mandarin, and so I thought like, all right, you are serious when it comes to learning languages.
I love languages, and to me, there's sort of overlap with music, and instruments. I mean, I think the same part of me kind of has that passion on both fronts.
Yeah. Well, it's something that this is sort of tangentially connected, but I remember some years ago, I hadn't understood what an art translating is, like whether it's poetry or fiction or whatever. And at a certain point, I came to appreciate just how much sensitivity and understanding of not only the nuances of language, but also like the intentions of the writer you have to have in order to be a good translator. You can't just like Google Translate it. You really have to think about the way in which
Mm,
one language or another can portray something. You can't necessarily do a like for like from Finnish to English or from which language
right.
to ever else.
You have to translate the context as well. So there's another layer of meaning there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to understand the context in both places. So like you wonder, yeah, about these interpreters for these really high pressure situations, like Putin, Trump, I mean, those people are under pressure.
For sure.
So, so you have a British accent. Are you based in the UK?
Yeah, I'm originally from Australia, but
Oh, really?
I'm currently in Glasgow.
Okay.
I Yeah, I've lived around the UK, lived in Czech Republic, lived in Germany. Now I'm back in the UK
Mhm.
again. But I'm an English teacher and,
Ah,
as a foreign language. And I realized early on that basically almost everyone wants either a teacher that sounds American or English. So I just
okay. Oh, you
leaned
just
into the Englishness
tweaked
of
it a
my
little bit
accent.
from
Yeah.
Aussie to Brit.
Well,
Got it. Okay.
it wasn't even Aussie at that point. Like when I moved to Scotland, I was desperately trying to sound Scottish and failing. And then when I became a teacher, I went, "Oh, no one cares about me trying to be Scottish. I'll just sound posh in English."
Yeah, it sounds almost like Liverpudlian,
Oh,
like like
interesting.
like Beatles, but a light version,
Okay.
uh, which isn't a bad thing. But I don't
No,
know.
I have
Is
no problem with that.
Glasgow? I guess Glasgow's pretty close to Liverpool, right? A few
Relatively.
hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. It's all
All
the
these
same.
things are relative. So anyway, before we go any further, talking about Silver Snails, is it now, should we call Silver Snails a band or a duo or either?
I would call it a project, but it's funny. I saw a video the other day. The guy was looked at the top 100 acts in the world. So now we're talking big music, right? And there was only like four bands. And it used to be 30 years ago, they were almost all bands. And that has to do with the economics of, well, especially live performing, but basically nobody can afford to keep musicians, on call. Everybody uses contractors. I mean, the same thing's happening in business. And so you tend to have the project is based around someone who can be a front person and then probably sings, writes the content as well. So that's kind of what this is. But it's also a family project in the sense that there's a husband-wife team behind it. But, for any particular event, I'll just arrange the music based on who's available and try to put together a band for the occasion. Same thing, for making videos, same thing for marketing. So basically there's a constellation of contractors. And I don't think it's different for the vast majority of other acts that are out there. And I was confused about that because I grew up with classic bands, like Led Zeppelin and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And that's like an equity structure. It's almost like 5 founders who have equity. And so they all have a business interest in it. And then they also have contractors, but it's rare. So I would deal with contractors and I kept expecting them to behave more like equity partners. And that created mismatch of expectations. Now I see how it works and I see why it's like that. And so I don't expect people to want to like have equity in my thing, i.e. be like a made man snail. But if that happened, it would be cool. It's just that everybody needs to make a living, blah, blah, blah. It's economics.
Yeah. Oh, that's a very interesting perspective. And this is like exactly the kind of thinking about the business side of things that I'm really interested in. So
Oh, good. Okay.
That's a cool perspective for me to get your take on it.
You came to the right guy because I started out as a Wall Street equity research analyst. And then I pivoted to this and thinking that I would crush the marketing. The problem is that the music ecosystem is very different from like marketing software or something else. Like you can't just sprinkle money on it and get results, as an example. Business people think like if they spend $100 and their cost of acquisition is 10, then they'll get 10 clients. And so they can just scale up by scaling up the dollars. But a lot of things in music is micro initiatives. And you have to know how to do it, and you have to know people, and blah, blah, blah. So I found the guy who co-produced this album, Dylan McGarrick, has a label called Bad Man Records. And his biggest act is a band called Starfucker, which is very successful, and originally from Portland. Anyway, so in parallel with making the record over years, I paid him basically to teach me the music marketing side of it. And he gradually introduced me to all of his people, including Howard, who has just been doing an amazing job. And so it's really my good fortune to meet this guy, but also as a finance person originally, of course, I'm very interested in figuring it out, mainly to reach a wider audience, but also because I'm curious, because music is also a business. So whenever I find myself like with an industry, I always want to kind of know how it works.
And the Portland connection, incidentally, is interesting for me because over the past year or two, when I've been interviewing different people, I found Portland keeps popping up. And, it wasn't a city that I had necessarily been so aware of like Seattle or, kind of more famous cities when it comes to music scenes. But I get the impression that there's a lot of really interesting underground music going on in Portland. And you lived in Portland for a while, I think. I know that you had it's a very tragic end to his story, but you had a connection to Elliott Smith.
Yeah.
And that was in Portland, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So both Ellie and I came to Portland from Texas or at about age 10. So then I kind of put down roots there until I went off to college, and then I didn't really come back. But my parents are still in Portland. I'm in Portland at the moment because we're going to play some shows, and we come over here on a regular basis. So Elliot and I met the first day of high school in French class and became friends, and we're doing things together and playing music together. And he, at that time, was already building the foundation for what later became his solo recording career, in the sense of like transcribing songs and doing 4-track recordings. And he actually put out full albums, one a year, each year of high school, under a different band name. And so I was part of this little circle.
Is that before Heat Miser? Where did they fit into that?
Yes. So the band was called Stranger Than Fiction, and that was Elliot's high school project. And he changed his name from Steve to Elliot in the middle of high school. So he was really going in that direction. And he made 4 full albums, and we would like sell cassette tapes on campus. And I still have a couple of the originals. And there was some great material in there. Some of it was kind of repurposed a little bit. And then he went to college and formed Heat Miser, went in a completely different direction, and then kind of gave up. But he had some demo tapes that a girlfriend apparently passed to Kill Rock Stars, which is a small indie label in Portland. And they signed him. So he didn't even like market himself. Like somebody else did it for him. And then he made 3 records there, and then he got signed with DreamWorks, and so that was his path. But I mean, this is another thing, Tom, that a lot of people don't realize about how long it takes to gestate a musician or a project, or to even like produce a song, the way that it's done traditionally, although there's a lot of shortcuts people are taking, to build an audience, to learn how to market. I mean, decades. So it's a long journey with basically no promise of return on investment. So you have to have other reasons for doing it. And then once in a while, people, get lucky, I guess. I mean, most of the people who do get lucky, and it's funny, I just saw on the plane the movie called Better Man about the Robbie Williams story, which is a classic,
I've not
classic
seen it,
like pop tragedy. But the thing is that fame and fortune is usually like a toxic drug for the people who encounter it, especially if they encounter it young, and it can totally ruin their lives. And it's not like I'm not saying that I don't want to. I want to reach. I do music to open hearts, meaning I think it's something that can actually like elevate people's consciousness and improve their lives. And it bypasses the barriers in their ideology and mindset, and so I feel like I'm making sort of spiritual medicine, so I want to get it to as many people as I can. That's my motivation. But I'm very realistic about what actually happens if you actually become, a top artist, although there's probably a variety of outcomes there. But for many, it's not good. It's like winning the lottery.
No, absolutely, for sure. I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, hearing you talk about your aims with the music, it completely makes sense to me, because when I listen to your forthcoming record, Speed of Light, it is a really beautiful album that does make me feel good. Like, I don't know if you can tell with what I'm wearing, but I'm basically wearing like a black metal hoodie. I listen to a lot of like very
so your dark side.
I listen to a lot of very dark and abrasive music, but I'm totally open to music that is not dark and abrasive. But I think, sometimes if music is very catchy and very poppy, there can be a certain aspect of cynicism that creeps in for me. But with your music and with the latest album, it has aspects that are really appealing for me. Like, it's very, I would say it's quite psychedelic. Like it reminds me of sort of the Flaming Lips. Actually, I would say I don't listen to a huge amount of Flaming Lips, but like there's definitely a reference point there. It's something that it made me think of more because I listened to them more as Mercury Rev. I don't know if you're much of a Mercury Rev guy.
I'm not familiar with them.
Anyway. They're basically like Jonathan Donahue, who's the frontman for the band, was originally in the Flaming Lips. And then at a certain point, he branched off and he formed Mercury Rev. So I think of them as sort of being essentially from the same core.
Mercury Rev. Wow. Check it out.
But yeah, I feel like with both of them, there's a certain kind of, there's definitely a pop sensibility. There's a kind of like a whimsy, but there's also a surrealism. And it's intriguing and sort of, it can also be kind of rocking as well, because that's something I found listening to the album. It's like, it's got its rocking parts, but it's
good.
It's unashamedly poppy and not just like cheerful, because there are melancholic and there are sad parts. Like fittingly enough, the song Would the Moon Know, like the start of that song is just instantly kind of like tugging at the heartstrings. So I feel like there's sort of there's an emotional range and honesty to it that is also very appealing.
Wow. What incredible feedback. I feel so seen and so heard. Thank you for all of that. The Flaming Lips influence is not an accident. They were a huge inspiration to me. I mean, originally, like my first influences are like Beatles, and then Rolling Stones and stuff like that. And then I got really into jazz and I studied classical and I met Elliott and I listened to African music and went to Asia. And so, like the answer to me is always yes. But when one does attempt to sort of create a style or say, this is our style. So pairing away, it becomes more like the Flaming Lips or the Northwest bands like the Shins or, Elliott Smith, or sort of what I think of all of it as post Beatles, like, because we're all making music having grown up with the Beatles. And so our ideas of what is good songwriting, like to me, John Lennon, short, pithy, almost like a haiku, that has a lot of power. And as an example. And then I like classical harmonies, and as do the Flaming Lips. So, certain approach to chord changes. And if I could go on and on about them. I believe strongly, and this is something John Lennon said, the job of a songwriter is to put their feelings into music so that other people can feel it too. So whether you're Elliott Smith and you felt so ugly before, you didn't know what to do. That's the refrain of the song that we covered. I mean, to me, that's like John Lennon pithy, and then emotionally like devastating, but honest and vulnerable. And so other people can just pick that right up and they say, yeah, I feel that way too. I felt that way. And so I also approach songwriting from that standpoint. What am I trying to communicate? Like, to me, my most heartbroken song, I would say, is the second one, called The Flagrant Display of Magic. But it's a similar, and it came out of complete disillusionment with everybody around me and feeling betrayed. And, but I'm going to, when I take that feeling and I try to clothe it, I'm not going to do something that's harsh and accusatory or whatever. It's not me. I'm going to try to take more of the Elliott path and hope that other people know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And yeah, Would the Moon Know, same thing.
And you mentioned just at the start of our discussion about how, the whole music making process can be a very long process. And I understand that the making of this forthcoming album was a long process itself. So maybe you can tell me a bit about that. What was the journey from starting to the point we're at now, where it's almost ready to be released?
Yeah. Well, we had a big bang sort of release of our project in 2012. We came out with our first record. We've been working on it for a few years, but we made all these videos in Italy, and everything was like doing it the first time. And we put together a pro live band, and we did like showcase concerts all over our hometown, and then took the band to New York, and we're just trying to, get a fast start. And so right about that time, I started writing the next album, and I recorded 2 of the songs, Evanescence and You Say You Know, in Italy. But then as I alluded to, I kind of had a crisis, I would say, kind of a breakdown, actually very much so. And part of that caused me to withdraw from like friends and family. And I decided that the team in Italy that I had found, to record music and play music wasn't the right one, because they didn't know anything about marketing, and marketing was my big problem. And anyway, so there was a few years went by before I found a new person and a new base of operations in Portland, Oregon. So then I created a platform in the US with the help of this guy, Dylan, wrote the other 7 originals. We decided to do a cover video, Kill the Radio Star. In those years, we also made the music video, which is like our most ambitious to date. So that's our marquee thing. I would encourage people to go on YouTube and look up Video Killed the Radio Stars by the Silver Snails. And that all took time. And then basically I went completely bust financially with the record about 90% finished. And so I had to basically put it aside for a few years and focus on earning. And then someone very close to me came to me and offered me a little grant to finish the record and put a timeline on it. So then I finished the recording, and then started gathering the strength and the resources to do the marketing part, which is what we're doing now. So yeah, so it was a long gestation. I personally believe, if there's 1 million+ artists on SoundCloud and Spotify, like, what matters with music most of all is quality. In other words, like, because I'm always looking for quality, sift, and I only keep the things that to me are like really standouts, because there's an infinite amount. So that was one reason I wasn't in a hurry to finish the record. Like, I don't have an ambition to make 10 records, because I think as a recording artist and a writer, you're lucky to have a couple really good jewels, and I would rather have 10 jewels than 100 rocks. So that was the approach to the actual writing and arrangement and recording. Spared nothing and spent years to get the best jewels we could. And then the marketing and the launch and the live was heavily impacted by kind of financial issues and personal issues. And fortunately, we're on track now. But now I can't wait to do the next one.
Yeah, that whole topic of being willing to take the time until it's ready when it's ready. It always makes me think of Scott Walker and the time between some of his records. And in a way with him, I think there was so much kind of mystery of like, but what is he actually doing? Where is he? And so to me, it seems to indicate an incredible amount of patience. I mean, I'm sure, it's like when you see from the outside and you don't know what's going on in someone's life and you go like, oh, they've disappeared for 10 years and there's an album. It's like, obviously a lot of things were going on. But yeah, when it's like 10, 15 years between releases, it to me, it kind of impressive in a way. But I mean, maybe there's other elements as well of kind of like, it isn't necessarily a decision to take that long. It's like, it takes as long as it has to take.
I mean, I think if your goal is to build an audience, then ideally you want to be doing something every 2 or 3 and then have a regular marketing cycle. And that's what most successful indie bands do. And I feel like they do relax the quality standards a lot. Like they have fillers on the records, just like in big music, there'll be 1 or 2 hits and then some filler. But I'm thinking more about just my overall footprint over my career. What's it likely to look like? I think at the end of the day, nobody will care about the timing. They'll only care about how good is the thing. And I had in my mind very explicitly, that I was trying to make a landmark record and the best possible thing that I could. And so what I'm saying is I would have preferred to have done it faster, and I'm certainly trying to accelerate. But at the end of the day, I still think the only thing that matters is the quality.
Yeah. And so you touched on playing with various different people, bringing different people into the project before. In terms of the forthcoming record, who is actually playing what, whether it's you, your wife, or other musicians?
So I write everything and then I demo it at home to kind of really get the parts and the arrangement of the compositions, and so that I can take it to a studio and then hit the ground running. And I almost always do studio musicians doing bass and drums. That's the hardest thing to record, the most resource intensive. And it's the thing that, to me, makes the most difference in sort of like how the songs feel. Like, one drummer will just have a perfect kind of touch for a certain song. I'm thinking of this guy, Ben Nugent in Portland. We just found him through the studio community. My co-producer, Dylan McGarrick, sourced him. And every time I listen to a song like Flagrant Display of Magic, one of my personal favorites, second track on the upcoming LP, and the drums come in, ba bum 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 bum. I just start swaying, and I think of that guy, in that session. And the first song, You Say You Know, was, we had this skinny little drummer. He's probably 20 years old in Italy, and he was like a ferret. Like he would say, "Hey guys, do you have any chicken?" Like he would just get hungry, and he had really kind of caffeinated up, precise kind of thing that he was doing, and it was perfect for the song. And so there's a lot of variation song by song because we're changing. We have at least 4 drummers, 3 bass players. One of the main bass players is a guy named Luke Yidsty, Ystdie, I think. And he's the drummer for Blind Pilot. You're talking about Portland band. So this is like a kind of an indie folk thing that kind of made the leap, from obscurity in Portland to, having a national profile. And so the studio we were in, the Decemberists recorded there. M. Ward did all of his records there. So yeah, it is true that post Elliott, sort of post 90s, I think there's been a flowering of good kind of art music in the Portland area. And Portland's bigger, it has more critical mass. I mean, when I went in 2016 to find a new studio, there was about 10 of them. They're, major recording studios around Portland. So, but most of it is, almost all of it is kind of underground. And then there are a few big acts like the Decemberists that kind of stand up. I mean, where I am right now in Portland, what's his name? James, the Shins guy, James Mercer lives like 3 blocks from here.
And so how does your wife fit into the process of making the music, Elisa?
That's a great question. She's originally, I had kind of an epiphany that this is what I wanted to focus on. And I really wanted to make it a viable sort of commercial project. So, and we'd just come to Italy. We just started to have kids, and I had a lot of freedom and free time. And I didn't want this to be a hobby band, like, a garage band or a dad band, because I know people who have those. I wanted it to be a real thing. And so I asked my wife to join it mainly as a defensive move, to give it the most sort of space so it wouldn't be competing with the family. Now, what I had no idea of was that she had some big talents that were revealed. Like, so for our videos, for instance, which are like little movies, that are done on set in Italy, many at our house, some at the beach near us. And we have all these costumes and makeup and props, and just like a movie, it's like they're like, videos by The Cure, maybe. She organized all of that and all the extras, which are like neighbors and relatives and everything. And of course, she's worked very hard on her singing. I mean, the Silver Snails goes back to kind of 2010, so 15 years of intensive, and our kids too. So they've grown up and they've recorded and done concerts when they were little and still doing them now. And we just sort of incubated it in our house. And so she's important. She's very important for the video part and the organization of live events and kind of organizing the participation of the kids. But she's also she's a big believer, and she's a psychic. So, and I'm one of her followers in terms of her visions. And so she's always given me extra belief when it comes to what we're doing. Maybe too much at sometimes, because I've learned that it helps to actually have low expectations. But it's hard to imagine me getting through the difficulties that I just described to you and still wanting to do it without kind of her support.
And so you've mentioned at a couple of points now the involvement of your children, and I was wondering about that, and also having referenced the video for Video Killed the Radio Star, which, by the way, I think also is like it fits totally perfectly, the song within the album. I don't know if you had I guess you did have specific reasons why you chose that track, but I was also curious, and I think probably I know the answer, whether the children in that video are your children.
Our children, and then some of them are relatives, some of them are neighbors. So just whoever my wife could corral. And I think her vision is like have a big group of people and lots going on. And so just to close the loop on who does what. So I write and demo the songs, then we record bass and drums. And then the middle part, like the keyboard and the guitar, I try to do as much as possible. And increasingly, for this album, I sang all the vocals in the studio because I really wanted, that's the hardest part, to get the best possible vocals. But now I'm switching towards doing that at home, and that'll actually cut my costs down. So for the next record, I can do maybe half in a studio here, especially the bass and drums, and a lot of the rest kind of on site in Italy. I just wanted to add that my wife does contribute musically as well. So she has song ideas, or I'll come up with something and she'll interpret it or add her spin. And then that had a huge impact on the first record, the 7 Melodies. A lot of the themes and kind of the branding came from her. The second record, I did a lot of it on my own in Portland, so there was a bit less of that, but Yeah. So she's a creative contributor as well.
Yeah.
And she sings live. She's here with me. We're singing gigs in Portland. She's going to be on stage.
Nice. But
Yeah.
with any children this time round?
No, they, yeah, the children are kind of in different places. I mean, we have a son who's 11, who's a good singer and good performer, but he's not really ready to like do the Silver Snails on stage. Like we would love to have him, but he's expressing hesitancy about it.
Yeah.
So he's done his own performances, and you know, 2 out of the 3 kids are kind of like that. There's a little bit of ambivalence. They certainly have the skills. Like one of them is totally gung ho, and the other 2 are still, I think, trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Oh, that's understandable. And I think, you know, it would be very insightful for people who are in a position where they go, okay, I want to record an album. Maybe I want to go to a studio, thinking about the various different costs. Can you give some sort of idea? You know, you mentioned how recording vocals in a studio quite costly. You're thinking about doing that at home in the future.
Yeah.
What kind of costs from your experience? What's kind of the range that people should expect in terms of the way that you've done things?
Yeah. So, I mean, I spent on the recording part, the studio in Portland, maybe $40,000, and over weeks and weeks and weeks. So doing lots of vocal tracks in the max. But I mean, and the most expensive part is doing the live drums and bass, but that also has the biggest impact on the feel because it's so easy to just go to algorithmic drums and then maybe outsource the bass online, you know, find somebody on Fiverr. I mean, there are lots of shortcuts available. But when you go to algorithmic drums, I mean, I feel that immediately when I listen to stuff, you know, if the drums are kind of mechanical or if they're actually human, that's really kind of the line in terms of whether it feels like electronica or pop rock. And so anyway, so you can expect with an engineer to spend $400 to $500 a day in a studio. What most people do is they have a budget. They say, okay, we can spend 7 days and that's going to cost us whatever, $3,500. So we'll just do everything that we think is important that should be done in the studio within that time. And then maybe do the rest off-site. So for a few thousand, I think, like if I really wanted to make a low budget album that's still kind of compared to the high budget album, I would do live drums and bass in the studio and then everything else at home, but still get professional mixer and professional mastering. And some of the stuff I would outsource digitally. So as an example, when you do vocals, you have to tune them, you know, with tuning software. And that can be very tedious. And I recently produced an album for a friend and I tested it out. I found a low-cost person on Fiverr, and for $20, they would tune like 8 vocal tracks for a song. So suddenly something that was thousands can be done for $100 or something. And I think you're not really giving up much. You're not compromising much. I mean, you could find someone really good and say, okay, tune it, but don't make it sound robotic. You know, do it this way, do it that way.
And when you say tune it, are you talking about auto-tune?
Well, yeah, Tom, like that's the reality is that people do their vocal tracks and then they tune and edit those tracks in software using something, the standard program is called Melodyne, but Melodyne is similar to auto-tune. But, and this is true with bass, guitar, drums. One thing they're doing is they can see the grid. And so if the note is like a little before or a little after when it's supposed to be, they'll just move the timing. It's much easier than re-recording. I mean, you try to get the best take you can. Usually there's 7 or 8, but it's never like as rhythmically precise as the tolerances that engineers are working with, especially because we're all used to machine music. So we're used to very regular timing and very perfect intonation. But that perfect intonation for the last 20 or 30 years has been achieved with software. And so you can change the timing of a note. You can take a note that's like a half step away or half of a half step off or something, and you can bring it into perfect alignment. And you can apply effects if you want. But I mean, so what I usually do is I do light tuning and timing with the software so that my vocals sound radio quality, if you will. I mean, it's got to compete with all the other stuff, but there's also a line there where if you tune it too aggressively, it sounds really artificial.
Yep.
And so that's where kind of some of the artistry comes into place, is to tune it just the minimum necessary to make it palatable, but preserve as much of the character. I mean, that's my personal philosophy.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I had a project with a friend of mine some years ago, and we didn't have a live drummer at this point, so we were doing programmed drums, which is, it it has its own issues when you're basically using a keyboard to like try and do drum patterns. And I remember, it's not quite the same as the Melodyne with the tuning, but in terms of the where the notes are, we would do this quantizing sometimes of like, trying to normalize the notes. But it's similar to with the tuning, if you do it too much, you lose any kind of feel that you might have. So you're kind of always playing that game of trying to adjust enough that it improves it, but not so much that it just turns it into something that's obviously artificial.
Exactly. Depending on your tastes. I mean, I imagine most younger generation listeners are kind of used to the robot voice and the artificial drum. So, it's very much a question of taste.
And I suppose as well, it's also a question of the music as well. If people are choosing to play something that's punk, or it's sort of, if it's like raw black metal, they're not going to go for something that sounds so polished, but it does depend on the kind of area that you're operating in.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned before various different influences, and I think on your website as well, it references very, African music and East Asian music. So I'm kind of curious, beyond some of the bands that we've talked about, can you talk a bit about the history of the other influences that have found their way into your songwriting?
Yeah, I mean, I was a little kid in a hippie household on the West Coast, and they had really great vinyls. So not just the original like Beatles and Rolling Stones and Bob Dylan, but also like Ravi Shankar, or Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, the great Qawwali singer, who did so many movie soundtracks in the US, including Dead Men Walking, amazing soundtrack with Eddie Vedder, and great crossover. So that was, and then there was, in Portland, you have people like Obo Adi, who's like an original talking drum bandmaster from Ghana, who settled in Portland and did, decades of amazing live performances of his thing. And then there were, when I was 17, I went to Montreux and I saw Tour Kunda, which is like a major like African crossover, Afrobeat act that was based out of Paris. And a lot of that stuff was really big when I was absorbing things in the 80s. And and then I went to study in China for, my undergraduate. And so I started listening to like Chinese folk music and collecting cassettes, and that some of that inspired me. And then traveled to Indonesia and I heard gamelan, and a lot of it was just, there was such a rich tapestry of different music, just kind of, it's just like when, just available just in the area. It's like if you go down the street in Los Angeles, you can get like the world's best Tibetan food and the world's best Peruvian food and the world's best Chinese food. And it's all in the same street. That's kind of the way the West Coast is for music, including Portland. Another example, so in our first LP, I actually used an Irish reel on one of the songs. And that very reel is on a record called Portland by a guy named Kevin Burke, who's a top Irish fiddler. And so we were listening to Irish music as well. And my brother played violin, and he would learn the reels, and I would sing and play the guitar. And a lot of stuff was in the family. I mean, when I was 3 or 4, I would sit at my dad's knees and learn Bob Dylan songs. That was his thing. And he played some guitar, and Line of Sight. I think kind of a destiny. When I look back on it, like if I write my musical biography, it just seems like there's so much. And yet it took me so long to say yes to doing what I'm doing now. I mean, I started super late, even though I'd been a musician since I was a kid. But that has to do with fear and scarcity. You know, society sends you a very strong message. It says, well, there are two conflicting messages. The first message is you can be whatever you want to be. You can be an astronaut, you know, you can be like Bill Gates. And I bought into that, and I still believe in that stuff. But the message that comes with it is if you choose art or theater or writing, you'll starve to death. And especially if you come from a lower income family like me, you're very sensitive to that. And so I was just terribly afraid of committing to seriously to being a singer-songwriter. And I'm still working through like how to balance it with feeding my family. And I still do financial work, you know, to pay the bills.
Well, that was also
So
something
there's
that
a
I wanted.
tension.
Yeah, I wanted to get into that and ask you about that with you having touched on working in finance and talking about, you know, the costs of making music. And so it is something that I'm generally interested to talk to people about, is that I understand there are a lot of costs, particularly if you're doing things on a sort of an independent underground DIY sort of level. I'm I'm interested to know where the return is financially from your point of view.
Well, it's like having a startup, but more extreme in the sense that the statistic is that 90% of startups fail in the first 3 years, but it's probably so. I would say independent music projects that have a goal of like a positive economic return, it's maybe 99.999 or something. But you know, times a million people, you can still find examples of successful ones. I heard a statistic that over half of recording projects on Spotify get like no royalties at all. And then most of the rest get a trickle, a little bit, you know, because you have to have millions of streams for it to really add up. Um, you know, of course, there are other channels, but I mean, there are things like sync licensing. So I'm trying to shop my music to middlemen who can get the music into to be purchased by Netflix or TV studios or commercials. The sync licensing part is an important part, marketing channel. Um, and I know of bands that have been successful that way. I mean, Elliott was a great example. His music was featured in major films. So somebody did a really good job getting him into Good Will Hunting or American Beauty. Because I think that, boy, talk about legitimacy and, you know, social proof, you know, to hear somebody in a show you're watching or so yeah, basically almost there's probably not going to be an economic return. I was in kind of wishful and magical thinking for a long time, and I found out the hard way. And so I think you should have other reasons and low expectations, but you still have to be open to the possibility if you would like that to happen. You have to do certain things to make your thing scalable. You know, like a startup, if it wants to have a chance, it has to have a scalable business model. Um, a lot of projects aren't built for scale because the people that are doing them don't really imagine that that could ever happen anyway, or that they want that to happen. I could write a script, you know, if someone was just starting out and what should I do? I would say, okay, yeah, you know, like be disciplined with your costs, you know, do a record every 3 years, try to get on in small indie labels, but trade up as you go. Don't try to do everything yourself, get a manager, you know, a lot of things. But everybody just has to find out. I am very proud of our music and our videos. I feel really good about it again. And I have very high standards. And when I listen to it, I'm like, yeah, I'm glad we went all the way with that. You know, I'm glad we produced it as good as we possibly could and even spent all that time because I wanted to stand the test of time and hopefully some people, it'll get under their skin and, you know, maybe acquire some virality or, you know, Yeah. So yeah, there's no return. It's, you know, but it's not just music, it's other forms of media. So I actually had some consulting clients that were like small publishing houses, and I looked at their royalty statements. They had to send money to their writers, and it was pitiful. It reminded me of, like, the earnings on Spotify for indie artists, because most writers make basically nothing, or sometimes they have royalty accounts and they get 30 cents, per period. And then there might be one person who kind of sells something, but there's a million titles out there, at least in terms of independent books. And so if you want to start today and write a book and expect to actually sell it and make money, like, people think that, oh, that's a good way to make money because famous people are always doing that, monetizing through book sales. But it's just as hard as music. And my daughter does, manga, same kind of thing. Um, it's just the nature of the beast. The internet has given us the means to participate independently, but it's also buried everybody in an avalanche of content, most of which isn't very high quality. So it's kind of brought the whole thing down to
Yeah.
almost an impossible level. And I'm very grateful to you, Tom, and people like you that actually say, hey, this is actually worth spending some time sifting and sorting and seeing if there really is, a diamond in the rough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's what I'm interested in. It's what I enjoy. It's what I'm fascinated in. It's funny because I find that, oh, like, there is so much music that is being released all the time, and it's impossible to keep track of. And I find myself so often, like, people will be talking about new music, and I'll be like, I don't know. Like, there's so much music that's more high profile that I just never hear because I spend so much of my time listening to the less well-known music. And it's not to be a hipster about it. It's just that's the world that I'm in, and there's only so much time that people have got.
So have you found some things that have just like changed your life? Like,
Oof. Oh, I mean, that's a difficult question. The funny thing is, I was interviewing someone yesterday and I was asking them the question of, like, throughout their life, what, like, musical experience had changed their life. And they gave me a good, clear answer. And I thought, I don't even know what that is for myself. I mean, there's music that's had a huge impact on me for sure. But yeah, I guess I'll have to think about what would be kind of my key answer to that. I mean, I've definitely discovered music that I'm very, very happy that I now know. And, like, there are musicians, artists, bands that I've just stumbled across that I've ended up talking with or reviewing, and they've become, like, favorite artists of mine. That the thing that
that's
I
great.
find as well, which is kind of funny, is and I don't know if this is, like, common for people, but I'll discover an artist or a band randomly, and then once I know them, I just kind of feel like, well, of course I know them. It's like obvious that I
Yeah,
would. And then it's just like, yeah,
exactly.
but 99.99% of people won't, and why would they?
Right. The brand hierarchy disappears once you have a personal relationship with the art.
Yeah. So yeah, so sometimes I find it's kind of hard to gauge, like, how well known are people?
Hmm. Yeah. I guess these days you look at their listeners on Spotify, right?
Well, that definitely can be
It's
a
a
part
good.
of it, yeah. And so going back round to the forthcoming album, in terms of the release, I
Hmm.
guess I read, but I don't remember. Are you going to have physical release for it, or will this be like
Yeah.
digital on Bandcamp? What are you doing in terms of physical?
Well, we have a very nice CD digipack with a booklet. So that I'm putting that for sale online. We're also doing a college radio campaign in the US where we actually have those mailed, and then we have a publicist follow up. Um, and yeah, concerts, selling at concerts. I still think it's worth printing CDs because there is no other convenient format, even though a lot of people don't have a player, but they come in handy.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice to have a physical, tangible artifact, I think, and also as well with, like, what you say with having a booklet. If you've got something else that you can refer to, whether it's lyrics or it's other kind of liner notes, I think that's nice. It's
Yeah,
more than just, a digital file floating in the ether.
exactly. Exactly.
And then in terms of the release, so you've mentioned the fact that you're going to have some shows and you're going to be doing some promotion. You've obviously got your websites. I guess the website would link to where people can buy the CDs if they want. Does that link to Bandcamp?
Yeah, I'm getting all of that updated, but typically, you can go through Bandcamp or the website. And also Spotify now, like, because you can use, I think it's Bands in Town, to push merch to Spotify. So merch has been a second order priority, but I'm getting it set up now.
And just reminding myself, so I will put this out on the 2nd of September, so just before the album comes out. So
wonderful.
In terms
That's awesome.
of people following Silver Snails, what is the best
Spotify
way?
and YouTube are my priorities, but we
Right.
also have Instagram if that's what you are into.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Lucas, thank you so much for your time. It was great to talk to you, very insightful. And as I say, really enjoying the music as well. So thank you for the music too.
Thank you, Tom. It was an honor and a pleasure.
You say you know what I'm thinking, what's in my head. I say if this is so, then what's the point of fighting?